يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We're continuing in this section on Kitab Dhamm al-Ghurur. So the book on condemnation of self-deception or delusion. And this category that we're in right now is Imam Ghazali is talking about a category of people of knowledge who are deluded by either their knowledge or their reputation of being people of knowledge. So last week we spoke about scholars in general, and especially people who are engaged in the nuanced theological debates and how those debates and just debating in general is a means of self-deception, because people who debate, they tend to just kind of like to win and submit their opponent rather than arrive at a truth. They want to establish a point of view, and that's not what Islam is about. It's about always arriving at the truth. This next section is, I think this is really worthy of discussion, especially, I think it's really relevant in our current time as well. It is the section of غُرُورُ مَنْ اشْتَغَلَ بِالْوَعْظِ وَتَذْكِيرِ. People who are deluded due to their success in being good speakers and good orators. So no shortage of good speakers in our community, and no shortage of people on the speaking circuit, people who go around, they give talks, they give reminders, they travel to do it, they do it locally. Nothing wrong with that. However, Imam Ghazali is bringing up this category as a category to be aware of, because there's a pitfall in being amongst this group of people, and Imam Ghazali himself was amongst them. No one can tell you about a disease like someone who's been through the disease. If you've been through diabetes and the struggles of diabetes, you know more about diabetes than the doctor who's treating you. Trust me. The doctor knows it theoretically. You know it. If you've been through cancer and chemotherapy, you know that disease better than the oncologist who's giving you the chemotherapy. Imam Ghazali, we're not going to talk about his story, but he went through a phase where he was the Michael Jordan of speakers. Literally, thousands and thousands of people would fight to get a spot at his talk. That is how popular he was. And so, for him to talk about this category, he's not talking about theory. He's talking through experience. So, فرقة أخرى اشتغلوا بالوعظ والتذكير وأعلاهم رتبة من يتكلموا في أخلاق النفس وصفات القلب. The next group of people he's saying that are deluded are the people who they are engaged in reminders and talks. And the top level of these people are the ones who give talks about spirituality. The people who talk about the heart, people who talk about the nafs, people talk about purification of the nafs. So these people could potentially be the most deluded. All right. من الخوف والرجاء والصبر والشكر والتوكل والزهد واليقين والإخلاص والصدق ونظائره. About truthfulness and piety and fear of God. This is the topics that they talk about, these speakers. Fear of God, love of God, sincerity, right? All these things. وَهُمْ مَغْرُورُونَ. And they are totally deluded. يَظُنُّونَ بِأَنفُسِهِمْ أَنَّهُمْ إِذَا تَكَلَّمُوا بهذه الصفات ودعوا الخلق إليها قد صاروا موصوفين بهذه الصفات وهم منفكون عنها عند الله. They think that just because they're talking about these topics, somehow they have the topic that they're speaking of. They think just because they're talking about piety, they're talking about the fear of Allah, they're talking about the love of Allah, just because they're talking about it, somehow that transfers and translates to them as being of those people, right? So this is part of their deception, right? Automatically they just assume that إِلَّا عَنْ قَدْرٍ يَسِيرٍ لَا يَنْفَكُ عَنْهُ عَوَامُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. But they have a little bit, but it's no different than anyone else. This beautiful speaker that's talking about sincerity, they have some sincerity, but it's no different than anyone else. They're just good at talking about sincerity, right? Etc., etc. So, وغرور هؤلاء أشد الغرور لأنهم يعجبون بأنفسهم غاية الإعجاب. And part of their deception is they're actually quite impressed with themselves. And this, we don't do any favors to these speakers, because oftentimes after a good talk, what happens? People come up to you and be like, wow, man, that was an amazing talk, bro. That was awesome, right? And this is part of the problem. We begin to inflate the speaker. That speaker has a nafs just like you and me. They're going to start to be a little bit inflated by that. And here's the issue. The issue is we live in an entertainment culture society. And we tend to view things through the prism, oftentimes, of entertainment. And if something does not come to us within the context or the prism of entertainment, we tend to get bored right away. Okay? And so the speaker is not just the speaker, he or she, and there's she too now, because there's some really good sisters, really good female speakers as well. It's not just men, brothers that are speaking, right? Du'at, females or brothers. When the speaker becomes a celebrity and the talk becomes a performance, that's when we're in trouble. I'm going to say that again. When the speaker becomes a celebrity and we can't wait to take a selfie with the speaker, and the talk itself is not so much educational as it is a performance. This is what Imam Ghazali is concerned with, right? Because there's a difference between teaching and speaking, right? Oftentimes, a speech has teaching in it, right? Sometimes teaching has no speech in it. But when the speech is not about teaching, rather it's about performance. Start with a little story, reel them in, right? Get a little protagonist, a little antagonist, sprinkle some poetry in there, right? A little bit of poetry. Talk about some, relevant contextual issues, and make it really motivational. Then you're going to get that wow. But how is that any different from a slam dunk contest? Someone does a 10 out of 10 dunk behind their back. Wow, that was awesome, right? That is that's a legit performance. But you might find the same person come up to a speaker after, wow, that was awesome. That's not supposed to be a performance. This is the issue Imam was, because he himself went through this. He knows exactly what this is, right? So part of, I think, he's not talking about entertainment culture. I'm kind of adding this, but I think this is part of our issues. We live in an entertainment culture, and unless something comes to us through the prism of some kind of entertaining, right, methodology, we tend to get bored and ADD right away and just, start checking our phones. So, and they're impressed with themselves. يُعْجِبُونَ بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. And the Prophet Muhammad said, ثَلَاثٌ مُهْلِكَاتٌ. 3 people are destroyed. 1, هَوَى مُتَّبَعَ. Someone who follows their desires. 2, شُحٌ مُطَاعٌ. Someone who's greedy and they give in to their greed. 3, إِعْجَابُ الْمَرْءِ بِنَفْسِهِ. Someone who is impressed with themselves. And there's nothing to make you impressed with yourself after you give a good talk and everyone comes up to you and says, wow, that was amazing. Right? Okay, so وَيَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ مَا تَبَحَّرُوا فِي عِلْمِ الْمُحِبَّةِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُحِبُّونَ لِلَّهِ. Why? And they think, here's how they're deluded. Why would Allah allow me to study all of these now sciences about what it means to love Allah and tasawwuf and purification of Allah, unless I truly love Allah? Of course, that's what it means, right? وَمَا قَدَرُوا عَلَى تَحْقِيقِ دَقَائِقِ الْإِخْلَاصِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُخْلِصُونَ. And how could I be able to talk about the nuances of ikhlas and sincerity unless I myself am a sincere person? Of course I'm a sincere person. That's how I'm able to talk about this delusion. وَمَا وَقَفُوا عَلَى خَفَايَ عُيُوبِ النَّفْسِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ عَنْهَا مُنْزِهُونَ وَلَوْلَا أَنَّهُ مُقَرِّبٌ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ لَمَا عَرَّفَهُ مَعْنَى الْقُرْبِ وَالْبُعْدِ. And I must be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, how else could I talk about what it means to gain proximity to God or to be far away from God? So, of course, I must be amongst these pious people. So this is how the da'i, or the speaker, becomes deluded. وكيفية قطع المنازل في طريق الله فالمسكين بهذه الظنون يرى أنه من الخائفين وهو آمن من الله تعالى ويرى أنه من الراجين وهو من المغترين المضيعين. So the delusional person thinks that they are fearing God. In reality, they feel totally safe from God. And they feel like they're the ones who have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In reality, they're the ones who are lost. So he continues and he says, وَيَرَى أَنَّهُ مِنَ الرَّادِينَ بِقَضَاءِ اللَّهِ وَهُوَ مِنَ السَّاخِتِينَ وَيَرَى أَنَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَوَكِّلِينَ عَلَى اللَّهِ وَهُوَ مِنَ الْمُتَّكِلِينَ عَلى الْعِزِّ وَالْجَهْ وَالْمَالِ وَالْأَسْبَابِ. And they see themselves as people who put their trust in God, and they're mutawakkilun. In reality, they just put their trust in the reputation that people are giving them, etc., etc. ويرى أنه من المخلصين وهو من المرائين بل يصف الإخلاص فيترك الإخلاص في الوصف. In fact, these are the types of people who would do a beautiful job giving a talk about sincerity, but they won't even do it with sincerity. Or ويصف الرياء ويذكره وهو يرائي بذكره. They'll talk about riya in a beautiful way. And riya, is when you try to show off religiously. So it's showing off. So they'll talk about the dangers of showing off, and in so doing, they're showing off. Right? So, again, he's been through this, and he's speaking from experience, right? ويصف الزهد في الدنيا لشدة حرصه على الدنيا وقوة رغبته فيها فهو يظهر الدعاء إلى الله وهو منه فار. And they act like they're aesthetic towards the dunya. They have no desire for the dunya, but they want it more than anything else. And so he continues, and he says, ويخوف بالله تعالى وهو منه آمن ويذكر بالله تعالى وهو له ناس. So some of the stuff is repeated. He talks about remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he's or she is the one who constantly forgets. ويقرب إلى الله وهو منه متباعد ويحث على الإخلاص وهو غير مخلص ويذم الصفات المذمومة وهو بها متصف. And the person will talk about all kinds of characteristics that are bad, traits that are bad to have, and they themselves are filled with those traits. ويصرف الناس عن الخلق وهو على الخلق أشد حرصا ولو منع عن مجلسه. Oh, okay, this is good. ولو منع عن مجلسه الذي يدعو الناس فيه إلى الله لضاقت عليه الأرض بما رحبت. So all these things, they're really just to gain favor amongst people and to gain some kind of popularity and some kind of reputation. Because if you were to take that person and take them out of the circles in which they teach, لضاقت عليهم الأرض بما رحبت. They would feel like the earth is closing in on them. They would feel claustrophobic out of anxiety. They're only in their zone when other people are putting the limelight on them. That's what he's saying. If other people are not if they don't have the limelight, okay, they are totally out of place, totally unstable, right? And so, and then he says, وَلَوْ ظهر من أقرانه من أقبل الخلق عليه وصلحوا على يديه لمات غما وحسدا. And if someone else were to come up and they happen to be a better speaker than they are, and people start going towards that speaker, then this person would die in envy and jealousy. They would not be able to handle it, right? Because they're taking away their followers. ولو أثنى أحد من المترددين إليه على بعض أقرانه لكان أبغض الخلق الله إليه. And if someone else were to be complimented for their talks and for their speech and for their way of da'wah, then they would see that person as the most hated person in their eyes because of their jealousy, right? فهؤلاء أعظم الناس غرة وأبعدهم عن التنبيه والرجوع إلى السداد. So these are the most deceived people. And then he's going to go on to say, in the next few lines, there's no hope for them. Because the only way you can change someone is through knowledge. But they already have the knowledge. They already have the knowledge of everything they're talking about, but what they don't have, right, is acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the place in the heart, which is where sincerity is supposed to reside. So there's no hope in changing them, because what are you going to teach them? They already know everything. So then he says this. He says, we can put this to the test for anyone. There's a test, okay? إن ظن نفسه أنه موصوف بهذه الصفات المحمودة يمكن أن يدل على طريق الامتحان وتجربة. Okay? If anyone thinks that they are pious and they have these qualities of sincerity and fear of God, truly love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why don't you put it to the test? So he has a few benchmarks that he talks about, right? وهو أن يدعي مثلا حب الله. So if someone claims that they love God, فما الذي تركه من محب نفسه لأجله. Go ahead and put it to the test. Ask yourself a question. What have you given up of the things you love yourself for the sake of God? Okay? So just put that to the test. If you truly love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what have you given up of the things that your nafs loves for the sake of God? That's test number one, right? وَيَدَّعِي الْخَوْفِ. Or they might claim that they fear God. They truly fear God. فَمَا الَّذِي امْتَنَعَ مِنْهُ بِالْخَوْفِ. What have you avoided recently that you like to do because you fear God? Put that to the test, right? Ask yourself that question, right? وَيَدَّعِي الزُّهْدِ. And you claim that you hate the dunya. You're someone of aestheticism. You hate the dunya, right? فَمَا الَّذِي تَرَكَهُ مَعَ الْقُدْرَةِ عَلَيْهِ. So what have you given up? Despite the fact that you could get it, you can afford it, you can have it, you can buy it, but you didn't, right? Because you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What recently have you seen on Amazon that you really liked, but you didn't get because you were like, this is just dunya and I have enough, right? Put that to the test. Go ahead and test yourself, right? وَيَدَّعِي الْأُنْسِ بِاللَّهِ. And the speaker, in their talks, they will talk about loving dhikr and being alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? فَمَتَى طَابَتْ لَهُ الْخَلْوَةِ. When have you ever enjoyed being by yourself? No, this is an important one. This is an important one. Because, it's hard. Like, when have we enjoyed, or when have we truly enjoyed khalwa? When have you truly enjoyed being in a place and time where there are no phones, no distractions, no nothing, other than just you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you're making dhikr? When have you really enjoyed that and saw that as, oh, I can't wait for that, as opposed to that just being like a duty that you're trying to, like a task you're trying to check off for the day, right? وَمَتَى اسْتَوْحَشَ مِنَ مُشَاهَدَةِ الْخَلْقِ. And if that were the case, you would feel like you're annoyed by gatherings because people they're not letting you make the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? They're not letting you focus. But in reality, it's the opposite. We love hanging out. We love being around other people, right? And when it comes to just being with ourselves, some people are terrified of being by themselves. They're terrified of the thoughts that they're going to have. They're terrified of the conversations that they'll have with themselves, right? And so they always want to be around other people. There's nothing wrong with being an extrovert, right? But even an extrovert can find energy in being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When was the last time you loved being with Allah? Just you and Allah, no one else. Put it to the test. So he says, لا بل يرى قلبه يمتلئ بالحلاوة إذا أحدق به المريدون وتراه يستوحش إذا خلا بالله تعالى. They're only happy when they have their followers around them, but when they have to be by themselves, that's when you see them in a state of anxiety, right? That's not the speaker who is truly sincere for the sake of Allah. فهل رأيت محبا يستوحش من محبوبه. Have you ever seen someone who loves their beloved that they would feel anxious being with them? Right? No. They would be happy being with them. So what is that claim of love that you're talking about, that you keep talking about in your talks, right? وَيَسْتَرُوحُ مِنْهُ إِلَى غَيْرِهِ. فَالْأَكْيَسِ. Then the intelligent person, he says, يَمْتَحِنُونَ أَنفُسَهُمْ بِهَذِهِ الصِّفَاتِ. They will test themselves. If you're truly intelligent and you truly love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will put your assumption about yourself to the test. And you will not وَيُطَالِبُونَهَا بِالْحَقِيقَةِ وَلَا يَقْنَعُونَ مِنْهَا بِالتَّزْوِيقِ. You will not be satisfied with superficial reputations and decorations of who someone said this about you and someone said that about you because you gave an amazing khutbah, you gave an amazing talk, and you hear that and you think that, but you're not going to allow that to convince you. You're going to put yourself to the test, right? And so, it's nice to give a good talk. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he even says in a hadith, "Inna min al-bayani la sihran." Inna min al-bayani la sihran. Some talks have a little bit of magic in them. Some talks have a little bit of magic. Like, talks can be very effective. They can be very effective on people. So again, sometimes people hear this and they immediately go to this extreme or that extreme. Like, okay, so we shouldn't give talks anymore. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, you the speaker, just be aware of the pitfalls of the position that you're in. Okay? Be aware of the pitfalls of the position that you're in. Okay? And I think something else, again, this is getting off topic a little bit, it's not. But I think just to apply it to today's time, I feel like a lot of young people in our community, they're a little bit too dependent. Their faith is a little bit too dependent on particular speakers. What happens if there's a controversy about that speaker? What happens if your entire foundation of faith is coming from listening to one or two particular speakers, and that's where your entire Islam is coming from? But then there's a pitfall with that speaker that comes out. What happens to your faith? Do you have a crisis? Part of the issue is we don't have the right ratio of our own personal relationship with the Quran versus our ears' relationship with speakers. You should have the majority foundation of your iman should be with your connection with the Quran. Just you and the Quran. You and the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no speaker, there is no talk that is going to benefit you more than the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But sometimes we will open the Quran, we don't speak Arabic, so then we just get bored right away. Or we will open up the English, but we don't know what's being talked about, so we'll get bored right away. But I guarantee you, if you read the Quran and you read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you read them together, it will make sense. And if you take your question, you read a little bit every day, take your questions and ask someone who knows more than you. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ ذِكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Do that every day. Your faith will grow independent of any speaker. Then you sprinkle on some talks here and there. Sprinkle. Okay? Like salt on food. That's where, like, you get the motivation, you get the inspiration. But if all we're doing for our Islam, okay, so we go to YouTube, right? We need a video on how to make brownies. Got it. And then we need a video on how to fix this thing in our car, how-to video. Got it. Then we need a product review on a car. Got it. Oh, I need a little bit of inspiration on Jummah. Got it. Do anybody see the problem here? Right? We've categorized Islam into just kind of a commodity, right? And so you for your dunya, you got this, you got that. And then for your religion, you have these talks you can just quickly get off YouTube. By the way, you can put it on ×2 speed as well. And you just quickly get through it and get the highlights, right? And now you've taken care of that religious thing. That's not how it works. You need an independent relationship with the Quran. إِنَّ هَذَا الْكِتَابِ يَنْتِقُ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْحَقِّ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this book speaks about you in truth. Talk to a convert. Talk to a convert. Listen to what they tell you about when they first read the Quran, how it affected them. You should feel like the Quran is speaking directly to you.
You should feel like a fish swimming in an ocean of truth. You should feel like a fish out of water when you close the Quran. That is where your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes. It's not through this celebrity speaker or that celebrity speaker. Because tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, something might happen to that speaker. Right? Then what happens to your faith? So, we have to we don't just get a little bit of Quran, but the majority of our faith from talks here and there. No, the majority of our iman comes with our relationship. It comes from tahajjud. It comes from salah. It comes from reading the Quran. Every now and then, sprinkle on there some talks. That's how it should be. Right? And so, kind of fast forwarding a little bit, you know, he says, وَإِنَمَا وَقَعَ الْغُرُورِ لِهَؤُلَاءِ من حيث إنهم يصادفون في قلوبهم شيئا ضعيفا من أصول هذه المعاني. Part of their problem, these speakers, part of how they're deceived, they talk about topics like love of Allah and sincerity. Part of the problem is, number one, they have something of that, but just a little bit. And then on top of that, right, ثم قدروا مع ذلك على وصف المنازل العالية في هذه المعاني. On top of that, they are really gifted at talking. And so these two things together is where their problem. Now he's acting like a physician, Ghazali, and he's saying this is where the problem comes from. They have a little bit of love of Allah, but a lot of rhetorical skills. And so they can talk really, really well, and then they begin to think, it's only because I have so much of this thing that I'm able to describe it so well, right? And then they begin to further delude themselves. فَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُمْ مَا قَدَرُوا عَلَى وَصْفِ ذَلِكَ وَمَا رَزَقَهُمُ اللَّهُ عِلْمَهُ وَمَا نَفَعَ النَّاسَ بِكَلَامِهِمْ فِيهَا إِلَّا لِاتصَافِهِمْ بِهَا. Had it not been that they have these qualities, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't have given them the capacity to talk about it in this way. وَذَهَبَ عَلَيْهِمْ أَنَّ الْقُبُولِ لِلْكَلَامِ وَالْكَلَامِ لِلْمَعْرِفَةِ وَالْجَرِيَانِ اللِّسَانِ وَالْمَعْرِفَةِ لِلْعِلْمِ. And they begin to think acceptance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's acceptance, is based on speech. And of course, speech is based on how your tongue moves. And of course, you know, and that's also based on what you know. And so these are people who will be quick to learn how to talk. They'll learn how to give a talk. And they'll learn what they need to learn about the talk. They'll learn what they need to learn about the talk. But the knowledge will not penetrate them because they're not approaching this in the right way. Right? وأن كل ذلك غير الاتصاف بالصفة فلم يفارق أحد المسلمين في اتصاف بصفة الحب والخوف بل في القدرة على الوصف. So there's no difference in them, between them and Muslims in general, with regards to how much they love Allah or fear Allah. The only difference is they're able to describe it a lot better. بل ربما زاد أمنه وقل خوفه وظهر إلى الخلق ميله وضعف في قلبه حب الله تعالى وإنما مثال المريض يصف المرض ويصف دواءه بفصاحته ويصف للصحة والشفاء. So this example, he said the example of this speaker is just like a person who's sick with a disease. Let's say they're sick with the flu, whatever. Well, it's no different, it's COVID. It's no different from anyone else who has COVID. The only difference is they can talk about COVID really well. And they can talk about treatments for COVID really, really well. But in reality, there's no difference between their viral load and someone else's viral load, right? So that's kind of the example that he's giving. وغيره من المرضى لا يقدر على وصف صحة وشفاء. And other people are not so capable to describe COVID so eloquently. What does it matter? You have COVID, they have COVID. وأسبابه ودرجاته, and the different levels of it, right? And the nuances of it. وأصنافه, and the types of it. فهو لا يفارقهم في الصفة المرضى والاتصاف به وإنما يفارقهم في الوصف والعلم بالطب. So there's no difference in the the kind of sickness that this speaker has, and general Muslims have. There's just a difference in the ability to describe the sickness, or, medicine in general. فَظَنَّهُ عند علمه بحقيقة الصحة أنه صحيح غاية الجهل. So for this sick person to think that because they can describe the sickness that they have really well, that somehow makes them a physician, or that somehow makes them healthy, that is the end point of ignorance. فَكَذَلِكَ الْعِلْمُ بِالْخَوْفِ وَالْحُبِّ. In the same way with these esoteric knowledges of tasawwuf, of love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tawakkul, zuhud, sa'ir, hadihi sifat, putting your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just because you can talk about this and you can give talks about these things, it does not mean that you have those things, right? غير الاتصاف بحقائقها ومن التبس عليه وصف الحقائق بالاتصاف بالحقائق فهو مغرور. ومن التبس عليه وصف الحقائق باتصاف بالحقائق. Oh, okay. So whoever confuses truth with the description of truth, okay, that person is deluded. I think that's what this whole chapter is about. Whoever confuses reality with describing reality is deluded, right? So this is فَهَذِهِ حَالَةُ الْوِعَاذِ الَّذِينَ لَا عِيبَ فِي كَلَامِهِمْ. And so this is the situation of speakers. There's nothing wrong with what they're talking about, but the true example for this is the reminders of the Quran. He gives the example of Hasan al-Basri وَأَمْثَالُهُ رَحْمَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِمْ. And this is, if you look at those people, if you look at the Sahaba, if you look at the companions in general, their advice, their talks were always so short. So short. Khutbahs of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, very, very short. But their tahajjud was very long. Their recitation of the Quran was very slow. Tartil, right? It was methodological. It wasn't rushed, right? When it came to their relationship with the Quran, that's what they would go overtime with. But when it came to giving a talk or a reminder, everything was just really summarized, right? So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from being of people who say something and they themselves don't do it. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Saf, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, lima taquluna ma la taf'alun. Kabura maqatan 'inda Allahi an taqulu ma la taf'alun. O you who believe, why do you say that which you yourselves do not do? It is most hated in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you yourself would say that which you yourself do not do. And one of the three groups of people who will be taken into account on the Day of Judgment before anyone else is going to be Muslims. One of them is a qari, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have given this qari, this reciter, a really amazing capacity to recite, a beautiful voice. And on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to question him and say, what did you do with this beautiful voice I gave you and capacity to memorize, recite Quran? Say, I recited it for people. Allah is going to say, you're a liar. You recited it just to show off, just so people would give you that reputation, right? And Ghazali himself, when he taught in Baghdad, he was like the Michael Jordan of speakers, and it wasn't until he had a crisis and he realized everything that he's talking about he himself doesn't really have, and so he had to leave that, and that's when he went into khalwa for many years. And he worked on all of these things. He worked on himself. He worked on Tazkiyatun Nafs. And then he came back and he wrote this book. Maybe he gave a few talks. But he's not talking so much now. He's teaching. There's a difference, right? So that ends this section. I think we have a little bit of time now for discussion, Q&A. I don't want to talk about any speaker in particular. So let's not mention any names of any speakers, but alhamdulillah, I think here at Adams we're really blessed. We have a really beautiful sort of conglomerate of teachers, of imams. I think we're really blessed to have Imam Majid. Yes. No, there's definitely, it existed at his time. There was a lot of competition amongst speakers as well. In fact, he's writing this book for scholars because he's basically saying you all have missed the point, So a lot of these are speakers as well. But yeah, at that time it existed. And nowadays it exists as well, and I think part of, I was trying to allude to this a little bit earlier, I think part of the problem is we tend to place a lot of speakers in a celebrity-like frame. We don't know any better. There's a microphone. Singers tend to have microphones too. Actors tend to be on a platform. They tend to be on TV. So when we see someone with a microphone on TV, we kind of just incline towards, okay, let's just put them in this celebrity frame of mind that we have. And then it's not so much, sit, learn adab. It's kind of association. Can I get associated with this person? If you find yourself more interested in getting a selfie with that quote-unquote speaker than sitting down and learning with them, then that's kind of what I think what the problem is that he's talking about. And because we live in an entertainment culture, I think we can't help but be in that sort of water, right? But I think the good thing about what Ghazali is sort of saying is that, just remind yourself, this isn't about being a celebrity. This isn't about getting a following. This is just, you're just a medium through which the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam are leaving your mouth and they're going into the hearts of other people. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously, I mean, when you're first of all, when you're grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you preserve the bounty. So gratitude is always in tashkurullah yazid lakum. If you're grateful, he will increase you. But in this case in particular, there was a set of tests, if you remember, that he talked about. I think it's really important if someone is in that sort of like celebrity speaking status, take a sabbatical. Spend some time just with yourself. Because if like that test he was saying, if you find it disturbing to be with yourself, just you yourself, just be with Allah, and you absolutely need other people around you all the time listening to you, you're amongst those people who are deluded. You should love to be by yourself. And I think we need that khalwa, like remember, he's talking about speakers and du'at in general. So I think we need that. And so doing that is part of the cure. Take a little sabbatical for a while and I'll say a few other things as well in regards to the speaking culture. I think, when I get a lot of stuff on my YouTube feed, da'is and people giving talks and stuff like that. And one thing that I think we have to be careful of is, when you look at the Sahaba, many of them were beautiful orators. Imam Ali was an amazing orator. But these people, they all had jobs. They all had independent forms of income, right? And so they were never dependent on their ability to speak to generate income. So one thing I think that is really helpful, it's not necessary because there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with, somebody giving you an honorarium or something when you give a talk. Nothing wrong with that. But to not depend on that and not depend on having to be entertaining so that more people will want to invite you, more people will you get more ads paying for you on your YouTube channel and stuff like that because you're entertaining. Part of that being entertaining might compromise the content of what you're teaching. It's better to be able to try to be financially independent and just do da'wah as a passion, not as a means of income. Okay? And so learn about investing, learn about halal investing, get into business, get into a side hustle, do something to be independent. Umar radiallahu anhu, he would go work on the farm one day, then he would go spend time with the Prophet one day. Then he would go work on the farm in Medina, then he'd go spend time with the Prophet. Imam Ali had his job, right? Uthman was a businessman. Abdul Rahman was a businessman. Abu Bakr was a businessman. The Prophet Muhammad himself was a businessman. He didn't depend on being a prophet for income. Who's that guy? Lupe Fiasco? I'm not trying to profit off the Prophet. So this one here's for free, right? He's got a little song like that, right? So, I think that's also kind of important because, this celebrity speaking culture, like someone comes into town and they want to charge the MSA $10,000 to give a talk. And they expect to be picked up, put in the best hotel, be given the best food, treated like a king. And it's poor MSA. They're going around asking all these uncles for money to invite this speaker. Something's not right. That's that kind of speaking culture, just giving talks and making it kind of a monetary, find something to supplement that. I think that's what I would recommend, and just do that out of love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whatever people give you, alhamdulillah. But yeah, I think some people are starting to call this out a little bit more and more now, but it can be a problem. And in Imam Ghazali's time, of course, nobody's giving $10,000 for a talk, but a lot of these famous speakers at his time, they would have a lot of followers, and the followers would go get their food. They would take care of their errands, they would go take care of the affairs at home for them. And so you kind of owned people's hearts if you were a really good speaker, right? And so, this is, part of, yeah. Yeah, yeah. 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 Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to we have to find inspiration primarily in our own relationship with the Quran, and we have to learn how to do that. Let's have some talks about connecting with the Quran, and hopefully people can find their inspiration. Me personally, I would much rather have 30 minutes to just read Quran than give a talk. I would buy that 30 minutes any day and give that talk to anyone else. You know, we should find our inspiration in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala primarily. And then there's nothing wrong with bringing inspirational speakers, because it is inspirational, and that inspiration, oftentimes it can transform someone's life. But that should just be a supplement, you know. Just like, you know, if you're working out and you're training, like you might drink a little protein shake. That should not replace the meal. That's not supposed to replace the meal. That's a supplement. And so, you know, these talks, let them be supplements, but our primary relationship, it should be with our own reading of the Quran, tahajjud, and then, you know, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put in you the ability to inspire someone just from that. But again, that's ancillary. You know, that's not the primary thing. And when it becomes a culture of, let's just get a talk here, a talk here, a talk here, a talk there, then what happens is, one, the speakers get burned out. Two, people give talks just for the talk. And they learn material just for the talk. Right? And so nothing wrong with making more time for just independent connection with the Quran, and continuing that, but maybe just, you know, reduce that water pressure a little bit. You know? Yeah, always. No, it's fine. Yeah, there's a big difference. So what I was talking about is sometimes people will latch on to, a lot of young people, they'll follow a speaker, and they'll get a lot of inspiration out of that speaker. And that's good, that's fine. But the danger with that is, what if something happens to that speaker? What if there's a controversy? Something comes out, maybe it's what Ghazali's talking about. Maybe they didn't really have what they're talking about, and now there's a crisis. We shouldn't depend, our faith should not depend on any one speaker or any one person. But there's a difference between that and having a teacher, a murabbi. It's totally different. Okay? A teacher or a murabbi, someone who is a mentor, someone who, rabba, literally to grow, tarbiyah, literally to take a seed, plant it, shelter it, give it soil, light, water, so it grows as scholars have given the metaphor, you know, and it reaches its full potential and it gives fruit. That's what tarbiyah literally means. By the way, what's the root of tarbiyah? Rabba. And from that you get Rabb. The idea is you're not going to grow unless someone puts Allah in your life. Someone puts your Lord in you're not going to grow spiritually. That person, the murabbi, they're not necessarily giving talks. Maybe they're just like, why don't you just go make some dhikr? Why don't you go do some khidmah? Go clean some toilets. That's what the murabbi might say. Your true teacher is someone who knows you, and there's someone who can see where you're at in your spiritual journey. And if you're deviating a little bit this way or this way, they can bring you back in with something specific to you. It's not necessarily giving talks. And maybe you'll read some hadith with them. Maybe you'll read some Quran with them, you know. But that's teaching. A little bit of difference between teaching, which is not necessarily entertaining. You need a lot of jihad nafs to sit and listen to teaching, right? And some stuff that your nafs doesn't like. There's between that and an entertaining talk. There's a difference, right? So, yeah. or maybe give some away. Yeah, I mean, I think you'll find this a lot in Ihya. Ghazali, what he does throughout all the different chapters, he will define something, then diagnose it, and then talk about a treatment. So like a metaphysician, right? Oftentimes, the treatment he talks about is the polar opposite of the disease. And so if someone struggles with obesity, or they struggle with an eating addiction, he'll talk about the importance of fasting, right? Or someone struggles with their desire, he'll talk about the importance of fasting, right? Because it's the polar opposite, right? And so if someone struggles with anger, he'll talk about bring someone, have them insult you, and just let them keep doing that, and then just take it. Right? Just keep taking it. Get someone, just let them keep insulting you, and just listen. Because it's the polar opposite, right? So a lot of times it's that. Because the disease a lot of times is you're on the wrong end of the spectrum. That's how all diseases work, by the way, in medicine as well. It's all a spectrum. You think diabetes is just you're either diabetic or not? No, your blood sugar can go through a spectrum. Anxiety, you think people have generalized anxiety disorder? They have anxiety and other people don't? No, anxiety is a spectrum, And it's not even clear at what point you give Xanax, All diseases are on a spectrum. Every single disease is on a spectrum. Okay, it's not an all or nothing thing. And I think a lot of the diseases of the nafs are the same way. And so if you find yourself way on the wrong end of the spectrum, then you might apply a little bit of, the opposite thing to it. So, yeah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a better understanding of this. اللهم انفعنا بما قرأنا وجعلنا من الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the true ability to implement what we learn. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teach us that which benefits us and let us act upon that which He has taught us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people of sincerity, people of ikhlas, people who truly love Him, and people who truly act by what they are taught. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا